Good morning, traders. Welcome to FreeFX, your free source of education for Forex markets. This is a free educational video and not trading advice. Today is Thursday, the 30th of July, and I want to discuss with you the matter of choosing a particular time frame, implications of that for your trading, and trading plans according to the information that you see. So I have the pound USD in front of me, and this is a 1 minute chart, and I can see already that there is a little pattern forming, and I've made circles to designate the movement that's occurred from low to high, and then we are currently here. So we moved in a sort of triangular fashion from a low to a high and then to a higher low. So the price is going up relatively to where we started at the beginning of the morning. Now, obviously this is a very limited view and I want to expand. So what would I do in this case? Moving up to the 5 minute chart might give me more information as to where the price is going generally. Now here are the circles that we had, 1, 2 and 3. How do they shape up in relation to the context? Well, obviously these circles have cousins further down the line. So now we have 3 lows, and each one is obviously a little bit higher, 1, 2, and possibly 3. Now, we can see also a line that I put in previously, and this is telling us that price is hitting in a certain linear way and bouncing, and this sort of joining the dots gives us what essentially is a line. Now, the line obviously has gaps. So it's not something solid. It's really just putting together information at different points in time and trying to visually help us not calculating the same trajectory every time. Keeping it there makes the job easier when trying to have a bird's eye view of a pair's price action in time. But this again is giving us a pattern which is obviously cut in time from this point to that point, and it's a very short time, from after 7 this morning to about 10. That's 3 hours. There is a little bit before this, but it's inconclusive. So if I wanted, for example, to say I want to trade this pair, would I go long or would I go short? Essentially, these two are the positions that I have available. Well, the pair as it is currently is clearly going up. But there is price here which looks to be going sideways. So is this price actually moving up consistently? Is this just a very small movement, but then generally the trend is sideways? I have two options here. Either I squeeze the chart, so I zoom out within the same time frame, or I could just simply move up to the next available time frame, which is the 15-minute. Let's see what we see. Now you can see that the sideways movement that we were actually identifying here is part of a bigger side movement up to this point, and then it actually comes from a higher level. So when we see that price was going up on the 1 minute chart and on the 5 minute chart, we also see on the 15-minute chart that we're not really climbing new highs. We're really just regaining ground from this drop back up in from yesterday. So again, we don't have a conclusive evidence to say that we could go high and take a long, or that we could go low and take a short. Let's see what happens if we added 15 more minutes. Now we have a 30-minute, and we can see from the lines that I drew here that the range that we're currently in, that goes back to the 20th of July, and this range is prescribed to this area, but then we did break that range and came back into it. So essentially, if you looked at this as what is sometimes called as a head and shoulders pattern, although nominally it is a head and shoulders, but it's not necessarily to say that the price will reverse the prevailing trend. Okay, but the shape is essentially there's a shoulder and there's a head and another shoulder below this, which is called the neckline. So we're back down, and this basically is telling us that from this point on we could go anyway, because we either continue ranging or we have another break to the upside, or possibly we actually go and break to the downside. So again, we need more information to take our to put things into context so that the move up that we've seen in this little formation is either part of a longer trend to the upside or not. So let's take the hourly chart now. So this is the hourly chart. Okay. Again, we see now that this formation, the head and shoulders so-called, is part of something, and it's sitting on top actually of this movement. So there is a bit of price going before it that is telling us to watch out, because this may be the end of something that has moved in a certain direction. Let's take the 4 hour. I tend to go from the 1 hour to the 4 hour without the 2 and the 3 hours. So let's go straight to the 4 hours. So we're jumping 3 hours basically. So we're condensing price further and further. Now you can see at the beginning of the screen, to my left, is the 16th of July. So that's 2 weeks essentially. Okay, 2 calendar weeks, not necessarily 2 trading weeks, but 2 calendar weeks. Now this head and shoulders, or this range that we were discussing earlier, is sitting here. Okay, so let's put a kind of deeper enclosure around it so that we can see more clearly. I'll put a square or a rectangle, so we have it here. Okay, let's make it a little bit easier to read. The lines begin to fade as we move up to the higher time frames. So that's the box that we see with our range. So the range that we're looking at is part now of something a little bit bigger. And what does that tell us in terms of the possible direction? Well, that sort of quote-unquote breakout from that range that we saw here. What levels did that reach in comparison to these levels at the beginning of the screen? Well, they are slightly higher, but they're similar. So we haven't dramatically moved away from this high. They're slightly higher. And what about this peak here? Well, again, it's very similar. So are we moving sideways generally, or are we needing to see something in a high time frame? So let's take, for example, the 1-day chart. So we're moving again quite a few hours. Now, this is the boxed range that we're discussing. And previously on this chart, I started looking at the high time frames to begin with, and then went back down to the smaller ones and worked in reverse back up. So you'll see that I put some lines. This is a sort of top level line, and see the peaks that I was showing you earlier in the 4 hour, and the peaks all sort of join up to make this almost like a top. Okay. And there is a line here which you can see on the higher time frames as being a trending line, coming up, squeezing price as we go against this top. So we have what is known as a wedge. So from the 1-minute chart, we got the sense that price was moving up. The 1-day or the daily chart tells us that yes, price is moving up, and indeed price in the bigger picture is also moving up. So the smallest time frame tells us that price is moving up in the context of price moving up in the larger time frame, possibly, as we'll see in the weekly chart. But in the daily chart, we're also seeing more and more clearly that price is hitting a sort of stop gap, and this is really a squeeze caused by this price level against the rising trend. So this wedge is squeezing the price further and further, and there is obviously not enough sellers or buyers power to dislodge it, to make it go beyond this impasse. So this impasse is really not helpful to traders in the smaller time frames as much as the ones using the higher time frames to set their targets. But I want to go higher still, and I want to go to the weekly chart to see how all this shapes up to be in the context. So that's the wedge top and the trend line here, and that's the circled area. So our box is now so small we cannot see it, but it's in there somewhere. Okay, so that range is still showing in there somewhere. But now we're looking at a bigger picture, so we're not necessarily having to see that, so it's become invisible, which is fine by us. Now this rising trend line that we were seeing on a daily chart is actually part of something bigger, and that something bigger is indeed the reverse of an uptrend, because we've come down from these lofty heights of over 1.70 all the way down, and we have since bounced, as it's sometimes referred to. So we've come up. So this movement that we see, it's not a very long trend because it started in April or April-May. So it's a relatively speaking young movement or a young trend, and it's not yet mature, and it still has room to develop further. Or it could be a correction of a downtrend, and although it looks to be quite large, it's nothing compared to this. So in terms of size, this is quite small. If it were a correction, it would be perfectly acceptable to call it a correction before this wedge pattern broke and we resumed a downtrend, for example. Looking at the weekly chart, for instance, you'll see that there are 3 candles here. And the 3 candles are quite similar in shape. They have similar bodies, which tells us that the open and close of each candle in terms of price is similar, which means that there is a balance, almost like a perfect equilibrium between buyers and sellers. And although the first candle of these 3 is a blue or green candle, the second a red, and the third a blue again, it doesn't really matter what color they are because they're all similar shape, and the wicks or the tails are also similar shapes. And this candle is not finished yet, but it's looking like it could be almost a copycat to the previous 2. So this wedge and the size of the candles and everything tells us that we are at a moment of indecision, of a balance between buyers and sellers. There isn't enough commitment to take price to a trending direction again. Now let's go to the final one, which I'm going to use, which is the monthly. Now this is really to be handled carefully because every small movement on the chart actually reflects hundreds, sometimes thousands of pips. So it's really looking at massive price moves. And I'm going to squeeze this a little bit just to show you the bigger picture as much as possible. Now you can see here that we have what is looking like a kind of wave and a repeat of this sized wave to the left. So we have almost head and shoulders, but it's not actually a reversal pattern. It's really just nominally that shape of 2 humps either side of a bigger peak. And these 2 humps are of similar shapes. So if we were to actually look at this as a cycle beginning here, you could say that the little uptrend that we saw on the 1-minute chart, if taken into context, could that mean that we might be able to have a breakout, and the breakout would be a repeat of this enormous movement back in the early 2000s, okay, before the great financial crisis? If this were indeed a repeat, let's call this B. If this were a repeat of, we'll call it B. If this can act quick enough, let's call it B. Okay, this is B. So if this were a repeat of A, okay, so A here is repeated at B, at which point we might see that we are coming to a similar size period, and we can measure that, but let's say visually they are sort of similarly shaped. But again, this doesn't really guarantee that we can go long here and make millions, meaning that, for example, we might say that this drop and this drop are different, and there may be more room to the downside before we finally sort of hit this, possibly this low again at 140. So if we said that we wanted to set the border here at 140, okay, as a sort of bottom line, this means that currently we're at 1.56, okay, so 146, that's 1,600 pips away. We may not actually hit it square on the mark, but even if we dropped half of that, that would still actually give us 800 pips to the downside. And then maybe, yes, we might see this. So at this point, just to recap, from the 1-minute chart, we were seeing an uptick. So the 1 monthly chart, where we see that it's inconclusive at the moment as to whether we are on the cusp of further moves to the downside or on the cusp of basically having a repeat of this massive rise of the pound, gives us a confusing picture, which means that the pound USD at the moment is actually a difficult currency to pair to trade, and you might want to go into another pair that has a clear direction. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please like or comment on the video. Thank you very much.